Thank you very much. I'd like to call our Board of Estimate Taxation virtual meeting to order. As you know, we're still operating on the governor's directive for having these virtual meetings, and we'll be continuing. Later on in the meeting, I'll actually be having to add an item to the agenda to continue this for us as a board until end of September. But with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. We'll start with the salute to the flag of our country. Up there it is. Are we all ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag,
United States
of America,
to the republic
for
which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
liberty,
with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Let's just do one little thing here. I think I could still see hands if they come up. So our first item on the agenda, we have a couple, I need a little leeway here. I'm going to call on the clerk for our routine applications, and I'm going to be expecting a motion that HS1 will go from routine to non-routine, and we'll have an explanation for that. So with that, I'll call on Mr. Drake.
So I'll read the first two, or all three if you want, but
The first two, well, you can read them all three, and then we'll entertain a motion to separate.
the first one is GM2 from GEMS in the amount of $2,350,000, which is a release of conditions. The second one is TA3 from TAG, $139,500, which is also a release of conditions.
Okay. And under routine conditions, Mr. Drake, I have HS1. Are you making a motion
Yes.
to move that item to
I'll make a motion if you want it to move that one to non-routine, move HS1 to non-routine.
Okay.
And I will second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion. We have our routine two items moved and a motion. So first on our two, all on the motion to move the item to non-routine, discussion.
Just like, Mr. Chairman, that item did not come before the Budget Committee.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tarkington. Further discussion? Ms. Tarkington had her hand up. Anybody else? Do I have unanimous consent on moving that item from routine to non-routine?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That brings us back to our routine applications. Discussion? Okay, on those two items, all those in, Mr. Drake, if you would do a roll call vote on the,
So this is routine items, the first two. Ms. Cruiser,
yes.
Ms. Hess,
Yes.
Ms. Krummick,
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington,
Yes,
Mr. Mason.
yes.
I'm a yes. Ms. Fasliotis,
Yes.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod,
Yes.
Ms. Erickson.
Yes.
That was unanimous.
Thank you, Mr. Drake.
and so it did not come to the Budget Committee as such. It was just a missing item. And that this is an item that Human Services has requested. This is requesting transportation money to be used for TAG for the delivery of meals for those in need of the COVID-19 virus.
Thank you. Discussion, if I could start off a question to either Mr. Mynarski or Mr. Geiger. If this goes to TAG, it has nothing to do with our fiscal year, correct? That this is for the meals that they picked up delivering on behalf for the schools, am I correct?
Yes, it is. And this was in their presentation. These dollars were in their presentation at the Budget Committee meeting.
Okay. So this would have nothing to do with our fiscal 20 or our fiscal 21.
No.
Got it. Further discussion, Ms. Erickson has her hand up.
I just have a question, Mr. Mason. You referenced the schools, but I was under the impression that the Board of Ed was paying for the services the TAG was providing, not Human Services. Can we clarify that?
I wish I could.
Mike, this was, they're delivering meals to their clients. This isn't a school program. This is to their own clients.
Okay. So Miss Erickson is absolutely right then. The schools are doing their lunches with tag separately. This is for help the human services customers.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Raymer's hand is up.
So I may be mistaken, but I believe that TAG is making deliveries of food to the customers or clients of neighbor to neighbor. Previously, those people were coming into the rather small, close quarters of the basement at Christ Church, where the customers were in close proximity to each other, as well as to the volunteers working there. And because that wasn't safe during the COVID period, they started processes from a little of what I understand. I hope I have some of this correct. That bags of food, pre-assembled bags of food, were being delivered, I think, to Arch Street, and were being delivered by TAG to the people who had been the customers for this food at neighbor to neighbor. And it may be that these costs, these transportation costs to the customers of human services are largely or exactly one and the same as the customers of under neighbor to neighbor. I don't know whether any schools meals are involved with that, with these costs. I don't know that at all. You know, this is a relatively small sum. If there's going to be continuing requests going into July, August, etc., maybe at that point we could be asking Human Services and or TAG to be a little clearer with us over exactly what those services are. But I'm hopeful that we'll approve this relatively small $35,000 on the rather scant information on this one particular occasion.
Thank you, Mr. Minarski's hand is up, followed by Ms. Moriarty.
A question and a comment through Roland, if you can unmute. For example, the school lunch program that spent around $21,000 where they used TAG, we properly coded that to the COVID-19 expenses, which I'll report on later. Shouldn't this technically be coded to the coded expense line?
It is.
What 55030 I don't recognize as a.
I spoke to the business manager of human resources or human services, and they said this is being a COVID-19 expense and will be reported as such.
No. What I'm saying is we've got all of the COVID-19 expenses coded to either 55152 or 53950. This would not show up in the reimbursement report.
I'll check with Tatiana tomorrow.
Okay, but if it's okay with the BET members, if we vote on this, do we have the liberty to properly code it, to recode it properly tomorrow morning?
Yes.
Any objections?
No.
Again, it's my understanding that it's part of the Feed Greenwich program.
No, Leslie, I was only referring to the proper MOC code, the 5-digit number.
Moriarty, followed by Ms. Erickson.
I just wanted to add the little bit of additional information that I have to Mr. Raymer's comments. The number of clients that participate in the food delivery program for Department of Human Services on a regular basis is around 50 clients. It's my understanding that because of COVID, it increased to 400 to 500 households that are getting this delivery. And that's why this expense is not budgeted, because it's an increase in service. They went from about $2,000 a month for fees for delivery to $17,000 a month. And Neighbor to Neighbor definitely pitched in to help supply the food and to they have a charge or an expense as well. This is just a transportation cost.
Thank you. Ms. Erickson?
I have no problem with this item, but it seems to me there must be an invoice from TAG or some sort of backup that it would be helpful to get as a follow-up at some point. We're all speculating what it is. Neighbor to neighbor, clients. I mean, there's got to be some paper backup just for the good of the order.
Ms. Tarkington, you have your hand up.
Yes, they said in their package that they gave us, this is part of Feed Greenwich programs. To elaborate in terms of what Ms. Moriarty said, they identified serving over 1,800 Greenwich residents It also included the Feed Greenwich Students Program. And again, they are going to receive $96,000 from the Community Development Block Grants, which I think they get around July 1st. And they're also going to get money from the United Way for these same programs.
I'm not seeing that in our packet. Am I missing something?
It
I'm only seeing the cover sheet.
the detail of the packet, I think, is there, Laura. It's in their forecast and their numbers. There's a thing called Feed Greenwich, and
Oh, you're looking at the tag I'm
See-
looking at the,
yeah, I went back. I'm sorry. I moved to tag to look at the details of it.
Okay, further discussion? I can call for a roll call vote. I don't see any, I haven't heard any dissensions. Would you like a roll call vote, or are we all in favor?
All in favor.
All in favor.
All in favor? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna record that as 12-0-0. Okay, moves us to our next item, which is NW3, and I would call on Ms. Tarkington on behalf of the Budget Committee to move the item, and we'll get it before us. We'll have a committee report.
Yes, I'd like to move NW3 for Nathaniel Witherall. It's a transfer for general maintenance and the redemption of bonds for $130,000.
Okay, that's on behalf of the Budget Committee. So
That's on behalf of the Budget Committee.
So while we're moving,
So-
Mr. Simon up to join us,
Would
committee
you like
report.
a
Budget
small
committee
report? Yeah, the Board of Directors, Chairman Larry Simon explained the need for the transfer of $70,000 for maintenance and $50,000 to the bond redemption program, and then provided an update on Nathaniel Witherall experience during the COVID-19 pandemic emergency. The state guideline, well, perhaps it's better that for the remainder of my report that Mr. Simon update the board on that information. And I would like to say that the Budget Committee voted 4-0-0 on this item. Thank you.
There was no other committee. Are there any liaison report on this item or anything? Otherwise, I'll call on Mr. Simon if I see none. Mr. Simon, welcome. We have to unmute him, I think. There he is.
You see me?
Not yet. We see your name. There
He's
you
muted again. Oh, there he is.
I'm muted again? No. Can you hear me or not?
Yes, we hear you and see you.
All right. So we requested the transfers for two reasons, which really had nothing to do with the COVID-19. One is that we had more maintenance expenses than we expected due to air conditioning problems, water valve problems, and we needed more money in our 400 accounts. And then in our 700 accounts, we needed money because we didn't budget properly for the redemption of bonds and interest, because we omitted one of our issues that we made in the previous year. And the money is coming from the 100s, where we have extra money, primarily due to a lower census. If you want me to talk about anything else like COVID or anything else, I can do that also.
I actually would appreciate that, but I want to just get through this item first. On the item on the agenda, any questions on that? I see no hands up. Yes, if you would, how are you doing up there?
Well, our census, we're now starting to take in more patients. Our census is up to 139 as of this morning, and we're taking in, I think, 3 or 4 more patients today. We have 4 patients remaining active on COVID, and we've had 41 patients who have recovered. We haven't had any new infections for quite a while. And so I think we're slowly but surely rebuilding our census. Roland was kind enough to produce for me a revenue report through the end of May, which shows our revenue to be about $2 million below the budget. Our expenses are running about $1 million below budget, which includes setting aside money for the retroactive pay increase, which is still an unknown. So if you put those together, we'll be about $1 million worse off than our budget forecast. But that number also includes receiving almost $1 million of Medicare and Medicaid money for COVID-19. And our biggest challenge at the moment is trying to give patient families access to the patients, whether they want to come and they want to be outside and they want to see their loved ones. And we're trying to find a way to do this in a way that ensures everybody's health. It's been a challenge.
Challenge seems to be the word of the year. Ms. Krummick.
Larry, what's happening with the testing of the staff? Has that commenced?
The testing of the staff began last week, and the results should be back, although I don't know that. We're testing about 1/4 of the staff each week. And so if people, there's no one who's symptomatic, they could be asymptomatic because we take everybody's temperature and nobody has visible respiratory illnesses. But if you test positive, you still have to be out of work for 10 days following the protocol.
Wow.
We
Mr. Weisbrot. Sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Simon. I'm
We
sorry.
tested all 88 patients who had not previously had any sign of COVID-19 and found 4 patients there, which I think are the current 4 COVID patients, who are not previously known to be COVID positive, and they're just going through the 10-day protocol. I hope and expect by the end of this week, we will have no COVID-19 patients.
Mr. Weisbrot had his hand up.
Mr. Mason, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Larry, did I hear you right when you said that we would end the year with $1 million deficit? If so,
No, I didn't say that exactly. I said we will be $1 million worse than the budget projection on July 1st of 2019.
Okay, that's why I'm asking the question. How and how do you translate that comment into what the overall deficit might be, or is that something we still don't know yet?
Well, I think we budgeted a $3 million deficit, and it'll be $4 million.
Okay, that's it. Thanks. And it's great news about the COVID numbers and the census. Thank you.
And to the extent that our census continues to increase, that number will go down, and it will take some time. We're hoping to have a CFO hired by the end of this month, and then we're going to go back and look at some of the to make sure all of the billing was correct. It was quite complicated with people on COVID being eligible to be paid by Medicare and Medicaid paying a higher rate, and they haven't paid us the entire higher rate yet. And then if Peter Minarski is successful in getting us any kind of reimbursement for the money we put into FEMA, and we get credit for that, that would reduce that number also. Because I think we documented about $750,000 of costs for Nathaniel Witherall alone.
Thank you. Ms. Cruiser?
Actually, Mr. Simon just answered what my question was whether that government 1 million was just in the revenues and whether there's more potentially incoming. And it sounds like potentially yes, on the to mitigate the expenses COVID related.
Thank you. Ms. Krummick.
Quick question on the director of nursing. Has the director of nursing been hired?
We have made an offer to the director of nursing. The director of nursing has accepted the offer. If she passes her physical, which I believe is this week, then she will be given a formal offer.
That's good news.
Very
Thank
good
you.
news.
I see no other hands. I want to thank Mr. Simon, obviously, for attending. And I think we're going to Mr. Simon offered me one of those questions that I couldn't come up with the answer. It's about CDBG money and a capital project, which I still don't have the answer whether when CDBG is approved, if the project that's applicable to them is automatically approved or does we have to come back. But there's time on that before we get to that. But that was one of his stumping questions of the month, which I didn't have the answer, but I owe it to him. So now I'm making all of you responsible to make sure I get the answer so we give to them. So again, thank you, Mr. Simon. It's very, very much.
We don't get our money for the grant until November.
Yeah.
Not July 1st.
We have time, but it's still an open question. I have to get the answer for you on that. And it's just.
But I was just referencing the prior discussion where Leslie was referring to people getting the money for the CDBG grant in July 1st. But I don't think it happens until October or November.
That may, Mr. Chairman, that may be, but this is the operating money for the COVID. So it was my understanding it was going to come earlier, but you may be correct, Larry.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Simon. So NW3 is now before us. It's a transfer of $130,000. I'll try this one more time. We'll see how we're doing. Do I need a record vote on this?
No.
One hand and I'll do a record vote. If not, I suspect all in favor.
All in favor.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I'm going to record that as 1200. Thank you. Again, thank you, Mr. Simon. Which brings us to our next item, which is Perrott Library, PL2. Can I get a motion to move this item and get it before us and seconded?
So the PL2 Perrott Library for $5,000 is a transfer for electrical expenses.
Okay, that's moved by Ms. Tarkington, not on behalf of the Budget Committee. Do I have a second?
I'll second. Moriarty.
Second by Ms. Moriarty. I'd like to call on Mr. Geiger on this one. Roland, can you give us the?
Yeah, they had put in a previous transfer about $5,000, which the controller is allowed to approve. They thought they could get through the end of the year, and it was only this past week that they realized that they needed another transfer, which is, so 5 + 5 is 10, so it's over the $5,000 threshold. That's why that's in front of you right now.
Okay, and it's simply just utilities?
Yes.
Going to utilities or coming from utilities?
No, it's coming from parking lot maintenance.
Got it. Okay. Okay, discussion? Ms. Cruiser.
Sorry, I'm not sure if Roland will be able to answer this, but just out of interest, seeing that there's so many other departments that had reduction in a lot of our expenses of these kinds because things were closed, any clue as to what's causing the overage? Is it increased actual rates or is it actual usage? Do we know?
The biggest variance was in the electric, but the entire major object code had additional expenses. There was a number of smaller items. They don't have a big budget in that area.
Okay. Thank you.
Do I see any hands up? I do not see any hands up. Further discussion? Do I need if anyone puts a hand up, I'll do a record vote. If not, everybody in favor of this transfer?
Yes.
Seeing anybody against? I'll record this one as 1200. Thank you. That brings us to, let me just share screen for a second. This brings us to our capital carry forward requests for fiscal 20 going to fiscal 21. As you know, the town charter is very clear that once an appropriation is made, if it's not committed, it lapses, except for the BET shall have the authority to continue to enforce for an additional year. These items, I believe, have all been by our budget committee. So I will ask Mr. Drake if he will, I'll ask Mr. Drake if he would get these moved together capital forward, carry forward requests. Mr. Drake?
There are 4 of them. The first one is PR3, which is $50,000 to continue a project in force for park restoration. The second one is PR4, which is continuing in force the repair of the Greenwich Point Causeway for $850,000. The third one is PR5, a continuing in force of $2 million for the Greenwich Harbor dredging project. The fourth one is PR6, $25,000 to continue in force the project for seawall repairs.
Thank you. And those are moved on behalf of one of our committees. Ms. Tarkington, can I get a budget committee report on these items?
Leslie, you're muted.
Leslie, you're muted.
Mr. Mason, can I ask a question? This is Leslie Moriarty.
Please do.
I'd like one of these items to be removed from the group to talk about that separately.
If I may ask, you, can I get the committee reports and then I'll entertain a motion to separate one of them?
Thank you.
So, Mr. Siciliano, Parks and Rec, we're talking about the park restoration. Mr. Siciliano, Parks and Rec Director, and Tom Greco explained the need to carry forward the capital appropriation to continue engineering and architectural, really a vision planning for the Roger Baldwin Sherman Park. They explained that 7 firms had responded to their RFP requests and that they would interview 5 qualified firms to present a preliminary future vision and potential options, which would allow the preparation of a better estimate of costs as a base for next year's work on this same park. The budget committee vote on this item was 2-0. And the application was not recommended to move forward. PR4, the repair of the Greenwich Point Causeway for $850,000. Mr. Siciliano explained that the request to carry forward would add it to the $1.3 million as a previous project to demolish the seawall, execute road work, add new railing, and repair the tidal erosion. The committee agreed that the repairs were a safety issue, and the committee voted 4-0-0 on this item. And the item for PR5, Greenwich Harbor dredging for $2 million. Mr. Siciliano explained that the carry forward request of $2 million was being made to assure the state and the Army Corps of Engineers and the town's commitment to begin the project upon completion of the Corps project. They did comment they were unsure of the timing on this, but wanted to make sure the town's money was available so that the project could move forward. PR6, the last item for $25,000 was for seawall repair. Mr. Siciliano explained that the carry forward request was being made due to work delays caused by the COVID-19 work interruption, and he assured the committee that this project could be completed this summer. The committee voted 4-0-0 for this seawall repair project for $25,000.
Thank you, Ms. Tarkington. I have Mr. Raymer's hand up, but I would recognize Ms. Moriarty for a motion to separate an item. And if that motion passes, which I think it will, we will go to that item first, and then we'll return to the remainder of what I'll call the combined carry forward items. So Ms. Moriarty?
First, let me just ask one point of order question. So there's a motion on the floor made by Mr. Drake for all 4 of these items. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is one time a year we do.
No, I understand that. The mechanics of motions and seconds, I'm a little confused because today.
They're all in one big action item. You are correct.
And who seconded this item?
I seconded it.
They came from the budget committee. I just had the clerk read them, that's all.
Well, the budget committee didn't approve one of them, so I don't know if the budget committee can move all 4 together. That's my confusion.
Gotcha. But, so I suspect then you're asking to separate PR3.
I would like to separate PR3, but I also have some follow-up questions for PR5. So if we can separate both of them.
Okay, so with that said, then
Can I amend my motion to include PR4 and PR6?
Yeah, right. So I have a motion to separate PR3 and PR5. Correct?
Yes.
Seconded.
By Mr. Raymer. Okay, so all those in favor, I think everybody's in favor?
Sure.
Aye.
Aye, aye.
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 Okay. So that looks like that passes. So that brings us to PR3, and I will call Ms. Moriarty and Mr. Raymer will be on deck.
Actually, I'll let Mr. Raymer speak first if that's okay.
Fine. Mr. Raymer, your hand is up.
I had moved not to approve this at the Budget Committee because it relates to a capital item which has been deleted from the capital project list. So it's design work for a capital project that presently is not before us. I think it's aggravated by the concern that I have that as we begin to come out of the COVID experience next year and are looking at capital items at that point, I think we're going to have a very large list of rather urgent items that have gone through a year of delay. And I just don't see this as being the most urgent among them. And I'm reluctant to do design work on a project that in fact then won't be done, won't be executed for 2, 3, 4 years perhaps. I'd rather look at the question of allocating funds for design of something when in more or less the same breath, we're looking forward to doing the capital project shortly thereafter, which is not where we are right now. So with this, I'd rather lapse the $50,000 a year from now or whatever, when we're looking at this capital project. Let's go ahead and allocate the design money when it's fairly clear that we're going to be doing the project and doing it fairly soon. Not the project per se, it's just a timing issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, just for everybody, I'm sharing the document, which is the item we're on. Just for everybody's knowledge, I'm just trying to share more for the public. So I need to get back. Okay, for discussion on.
Mr. Siciliano is as an attendee. I don't know if you want to bring him over as a panelist.
Thank you very much. Would love to hear from him on this.
Hello.
Good evening, Director Joe. Are you there?
Is he muted?
Hello.
Yeah, I hear him.
I hear you, Joe.
Are you there?
We see you and we hear you.
Hey, how's everybody tonight? As explained, the project is we do have we have RFP package out. We do have 5 qualified bidders out of 7 that were submitted, and as was well explained, this is about the vision for the gateway to Roger Sherman Baldwin Park, which includes Roger Sherman Baldwin Park, the park's building, entranceway to the ferry dock, and this would be to create the vision. This would be hiring both a landscape designer and a facilities designer all in one. It would be a firm that would have to have both complements of that type of work and design. And we are in the process of scoring the packets. I guess there's not much more I can tell you about it. Mr. Raymer talked about the timing, since the money has been, the $1 million requested has been moved out. It's just, what's the pleasure of getting the work done? We've been asked by the first selectman that this is one of his priority projects and we would like to move it forward. So that's why we're here this evening to ask permission to carry the 50,000.
Further discussion, just raise your hands if you would. Ms. Erickson?
If I could just ask Mr. Siciliano a question. Joe, I went back and looked at the RFP on the purchasing website. Is there any community involvement or land use involvement? I view this as sort of a feasibility study. Is that the right way to look at this?
Yes, there is a portion of this that has a community input to this, to the outline that we're putting together. At some point, when the design gets to, starts to go forward, there will be, 30% site plan approval, 100% site plan approval, and that's when it'll go through the planning and zoning process. But in this initial process, their planning and zoning is not part of that. There are some community inputs by some of the major users that use the facility. And, right up in the front, it talks about, things like the Food and Wine Festival, Town Party, other large scale events. They're all included in the introductory because that's part of, gaining some interest from the community. So hopefully in future years, when we do start to put some money into the park, that we can also seek some partnerships out of that. So obviously we want to hear from them.
Thank you.
Mr. Weisbrod?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Siciliano, question for you. Does this project have any connection at all to the Gateway to Greenwich project?
No, it does not. That's a completely separate project. It just happened to we were talking about, when we talk about Gateway, we're talking to the Roger Sherman Baldwin Park ferry landing area. They're not together at all.
Thank you.
If I may, I don't see any hands up. Mr. Geiger, what year? Oh, I'll get to Mr. Drake. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we did a wise thing as a board to defer the big portion of this capital, but it also seems smart to do the engineering work so that when we finally emerge from our COVID shutdown, we're ready to go and advance some projects for the citizens. I think, tell me, wasn't this one well discussed in the election and in the prior months, and therefore it has public support, and I think we would do well under those circumstances to keep it moving forward for the small amount of $50,000 of engineering money.
Is there a response to that? Mr. Raymer is next.
The concern that I have, repeating myself, is that these are times of pressure. So we've been led to understand. I think that $50,000 could be spent in a lot of different ways. I don't view this as being the top priority, and especially in a setting in which the capital funds, the $1 million that we were asked for wasn't even the cost of the whole project. The whole project is a considerably larger figure than that. I don't know what our appetite will be to spend the money on that larger project when we come back out of hiding and are looking at the pent-up demand of the whole series of things that pushed back this year. I believe we pushed back some $70 million worth of capital projects. Some of them are, I think, quite important, more important than this. We can't do them all in a single year. And so the logic then becomes we're going to do design work on a capital project in which the execution of that project is well down the road. And that doesn't make sense. It doesn't even make architectural engineering sense. That so much changes over time that you really need to do design work in some proximity to the execution of the project itself.
Mr. Weisbrod?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm thinking of the very excellent work that was done by the RTM Finance Committee, in which they challenged us, not only the BET, but the town, to consider the amount of funds that might be available for capital projects. And that, I think, didn't even take into account the reduction in the capital tax levy that we had to take this year because of the COVID crisis. And so I'm a little concerned about adding, however worthy the project may be, adding design work, which is really a feeder into the actual funding for a project that's really not been on the queue per se. So it just seems to me a year when we really do need to tighten our belt and tighten the pipeline of projects, as was commented on by the RTM Finance Committee. So I have a concern. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Hess's hand is up next.
Yes, thank you. I kind of view it a little differently. I all agree that we we did not support this project kind of given the current environment that we find ourselves in. And I supported that when we voted on the budget. But, there's been a fair amount of work that's done. And I think, there's certain things that we know that we're likely going to want to do, whether it's, possibly moving the Parks and Rec building or, I know Mr. Raymer referred to that this is going to be a very large cost. I don't think we really have a sense yet of what that cost will be. So this isn't money that we're adding to the budget. It was already there. It's whether or not we allow them to kind of let it go another year, but it's not like they haven't done anything with it. They've made some progress on it. So from my perspective, I'm very interested to see, what we might or might not do and just try to get a sense of it. And then we can size that out and decide how we put it in the queue and line that up versus other priorities that we have as a town. But I would be very supportive, and I am very supportive, and will vote in favor of allowing this money and just let Joe and team come back to us. So thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands. If I may, Mr. Geiger, what year is the original appropriation on this?
It's this current fiscal year, 1920.
Okay.
No, couldn't be right, could it?
No, I think Mr. Raymer's right. I think this is an 1819 appropriation.
No.
We would need to continue it if it was this year's appropriation.
Got it. Okay. So let me offer some thoughts maybe the BET should think about considering here. And I know this is a very unique year, and we've kind of made that very clear in everything anybody has ever said. But when it comes to capital project carry forward, in my opinion, what I think the BET is looking for normally is we approve something and we're saying to departmental management, hey, why didn't you get on it? What was the delay? What caused you a delay, and why you need to start it late? And I think that's what's really what these items are before us. I think you're going to see a blend as we work through the next fiscal year of certain things that are going to be impacted by everything going on, certain things that might not be. That might just, might not be. So I tend to want to continue capital requests because I'm actually working with departmental management to say, okay, you didn't get it done. You need another year. Okay, we'll give you another year. Did the scope change? I don't think the scope has changed. I haven't heard any of that. So it tends to make me want to say, I want to continue this in force. And, the department head may run into a diversion where they can't, but I feel that I'm not trying to change all the planning. We've made projects we've deferred and projects we haven't. Those were decisions. And I think part of our job here is with the departmental management, I think the department is saying here, I can continue progress on this now. I didn't in the first year, but I can going forward now. So just my thoughts. Ms. Moriarty's hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of comments because I did not support this moving forward at the budget committee, but I will vote today to approve the continuation of the project. My concern, though, at the budget committee was a different standard being held for this project than all of our other projects, in that the budget committee was considering the next project to approve construction funds before we even knew what we were going to build or how we were going to build anything. And that was concerning to me. So for the reason that I don't want to have that same conversation again today and be approving or looking at a capital project without knowing its scope, its ultimate cost, its ultimate goals, I'll support this moving forward, but I hope we have concrete information when we start weighing this project against all the other, the $116 million that are sitting in our fiscal 22 capital budget at the moment.
Your point. Ms. Erickson.
Yes, just for my own edification, because I just looked up, a capital project appropriation statement, and I think Roland's right. I think this is a fiscal 20 project. So is this properly before us?
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought it was 2 year. You had 2 years to spend. No?
it will lapse June 30th if not continued in force, because there's been no commitment signed towards this, whatever the amount of money is, towards this 50,000. There's been nothing committed to it. So on June 30th, it would lapse.
Okay.
And that's
So-
why June we do this annually.
All right. Thank you for that clarity.
Well-
And just if I could ask one more question of Mr. Siciliano, as I understand it, the bid was put out in early March, and due to the COVID situation, you had to delay a few times. But how long do you estimate the bids would be good for that you have in hand of the 5 qualified bidders?
The bids are currently good for 60 days. And what happens is that we're just in the preliminary scoring stage. We have not awarded the contract. So all of these contractors are very interesting. I mean, interested. They only have, it's only services that they're providing. There's no materials or anything. So they're solid on the 5 qualified bidders are solid until the contract is awarded.
Okay. Okay. I see no more hands up. So on PR4, Mr. Drake, would you call for a recorded vote on PR4?
It's PR3.
Yeah, PR3.
Thank you so much, Mr. Raymer.
Okay, this is a recorded vote on PR3. Ms. Erickson,
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod,
No.
Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Raymer,
No.
Ms. Fastiotis.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Mr. Mason,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington,
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes.
Ms. Crumick,
No.
Ms. Hess,
Yes.
Ms. Cruiser.
Yes.
That was 9-3. It passes.
Thank you very much. And the other item we separated was
5.
Five.
PR5. Okay, discussion on PR5. Ms. Moriarty?
Yes, I wanted to follow up on this project, on where we stand in the queue for the funding. This project does require or does have state or federal funds for the majority of the project. Can you tell us where we stand on the list and what might be holding us up from moving ahead?
Are you asking me that question, Leslie?
Yeah, through the chair.
because I can't answer your question because this was money that you parked in my budget. This is a harbor management committee funding, and but this is in my budget under special F fund, and it's just been placed there. And I am not part of. I'm part of a conversation, but I am not taking. My department is not taking the lead on execution of this item. I can tell you that there is potentially there may be a Zoom meeting next week with the state dredge coordinator that might give us some insight about this $2 million or the project moving forward. And we are excited to hear that because it's been pretty stagnant for quite some time. So, but other than that, I can't tell you, I have no other details for you.
Mr. Chair, can I ask that we maybe formally ask these questions in writing to the Harbor Commission if they're the ones who are the lead on this, or is it the town administrator? But I think we would want an update on what's happening here.
If I'll respond to that, I fully agree. I will say, with the last conversation we were just talking about with continuing in force, in my time in the government, I cannot tell you how many times we had a lapse, a dredging project, and reappropriate it again, lapse it and reappropriate it. That's when it was back under the Parks and Rec Department. So, we can never get an answer. But I think that is I think the Harbor Management Commission should definitely, we can draft a note and try to get a formal update at should we ask for it for our July Budget Committee meeting?
Yes, that would be.
We can get it sooner. I'm sure we can get it sooner, but if they're meeting next week or so, that might be the time they get the answer. So, Ms. Tarkington, can I ask for a string around your pinky on that for a request? Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Raymer's hand is up.
I was only an inquiry as to whether or not there's any reason why we can't continue this to the July meeting.
if you would like my response, I think as of June 30th, by charter, it lapses. That's why we do our June carryovers in the month of June, because the fiscal year ends June 30th.
So if we don't act on the, I mean, we can get answers to the questions, but the questions will be answered after we've already continued these funds in force.
I think I might have to agree with that.
Okay, I mean, I don't necessarily object to that. I just want to be sure people understand what we're doing.
No, that's fair. Mr. Drake, your hand is up.
Yes, I would just say it's, as we've noted, it's so unwieldy to get those other authorities in the, whether it's the Army Corps of Engineers or the authorities in Hartford, it's so unwieldy to get them to act that it's best for us not to obstruct ourselves by letting this lapse if that slows down the progress that we ask of others. So let's do the practical. I think we should do the practical thing and continue it. We can get information later and manage it later, but we wouldn't want to stop it when the other bodies are finally deciding to take it up.
Okay, further discussion?
I do just want to note, I'm looking at the webpage for the Harbor Management Commission, and it is on their agenda for Wednesday.
Okay. Good enough, good enough. Mr. Drake, I think we need a roll call vote on PR 5.
Yes, Ms. Cruiser,
Yes.
Ms. Hess,
Yes.
Ms. Kremick, Ms.
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington,
You're on mute, Leslie.
Ms. Tarkington,
Yes.
Mr. Mason.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Ms. Fasliotis,
Yes.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod,
Yes.
Ms. Erickson.
Yes.
That was unanimous.
Thank you. That brings us back to the two, I'm going to call the two items to carry forward request, which is PR 4 and PR 6. Discussion. Do I need a roll call vote on those two items?
No.
Seeing no hands, I'm assuming everyone's in favor. Any opposed? Those items have carried 12-0-0. Brings us to the Assessors Report. And
Mike, can I say one quick thing?
certainly,
Is it useful to Kathy Sador in making her minutes to be a panelist so she can see the screen we see? And could we promote her to make her job easier?
please, yes, we definitely should do that. While Lauren is going from attendee to panelist, I just want to always make sure I thank Craig Jones for all the support. I got a text from him before the meeting, and he says, "Do you need us?" Because we're really kind of backing down. Everybody's running a meeting, and my jaw dropped, and I said, "Uh-oh, no, you can't go anywhere." I said, "Just get us going to start it in case somebody has a problem getting on." But we always want to thank them, and I always sometimes forget to do that at the end of the meeting. But Lauren, welcome. Hello.
Hello. I've unmuted mine, but does somebody have to unmute me on the other side?
Oh,
there.
you're good.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chair and fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the Assessors Report for June 2020. So today we sent the tax bill file to Quality Data for the July 2020 tax bills. We will review proofs later on this week, and hopefully we'll have them out next week at the earliest, but definitely by July 1st. Second item I have is that we had 6 tax appeals filed to Superior Court so far. We have 2 residential and 4 commercial properties. It's my understanding that due to COVID, the deadline has been extended, and it will be continued to be extended, but I haven't heard of any additional tax appeals beyond the 6 that we have. Our senior and disabled program, to date, we have 513 seniors and disabled who have qualified for the local program. It's the same number that we had last year. Our office is still accepting these applications, and we will do so until August 5th. So we may be adjusting the numbers that I have in the report. Okay. And finally, you'll find in the packet, there's a letter to the Office of Policy and Management. And we've decided after discussions with revaluation companies and various other people, other my BET liaisons and the town, and to the selectmen and what have you, it's probably in the best interest of the town of Greenwich to postpone the 2020 reval. We will be sending this letter. The first selectman will send a letter to the Office of Policy and Management. The Office of Policy and Management then has to grant us that extension for 1 year. So instead of doing a revaluation for 2020, we will do and implement a revaluation for October 1st, 2021, which means it will be on your July 2022 tax bills. Does anybody have any questions for me this evening?
The hands up. I see Miss Morarity's hand is up, followed by Miss Erickson.
This is a silly question, but if we delay the revaluation till 2021, does that then push succeeding revaluations? Is it 5 years after that, or does it revert to the
4 years?
It's 4, yes, because actually in the statute, it actually gives us a year. So, and it's supposed to be 5 years from the year that they actually gave to us, which is, I believe, but I will check to make sure, but it is my understanding that we will do it again in 2025.
Okay, thank you.
Miss Erickson, followed by Miss Hess.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Elliott. Just 2 questions. One on the postponement of the reval. When would you expect to hear back from OPM?
Well, that's a good question. Hopefully we'll hear back sooner rather than later. It's going to really put us in a spot. The statute says we weren't supposed to actually notify or ask for an extension until sometime this fall, but that when they created this statute, this extension statute, they never really contemplated that there would be a pandemic. The only thing that they contemplated was basically a revaluation or something, incapacity of your assessor, what have you. And so that the deadline to file, the time to file the extension is really not until October, November. We are going to ask for it now. And hopefully the Office of Policy and Management, I've never heard them not grant an extension. So hopefully they'll let us know, and hopefully we'll be able to find out by the end of the month.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And then my second question, I'm looking at the data for the building permits and the delta between this year and last year. And I'm just trying to understand how I read this data. Obviously, some of this is reduced volume due to the pandemic, but there's one month in particular that strikes me, and that's on the residential side for April 20. And there's a $19 million delta from the prior year. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about normal fluctuations, or was there an unusually large project last year? Help me understand what I'm looking at.
So basically, most of our building permits actually do get pulled in the spring. So what you're seeing is that right now the residential permits were down $6.2 million compared to last year. We get the majority of permits are actually pulled in March, April, May, and so that's why you see such a big delta in that month.
Thank you. Ms. Hess has her hand up next.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious, are other towns also looking to postpone this for a year given the COVID pandemic? Are we, I'm just kind of curious how other towns are handling it.
There's a couple of towns that are contemplating doing it. I believe Derby and possibly Fairfield were considering it, but I think a lot of the towns are going to continue to go forward with their revaluation. The COVID's not affecting them as much as it is affecting the town of Greenwich. And they don't have the tax base that we do. So it's a little easy. It's a lot easier actually for some of these municipalities to do their revaluations. But I just don't think the town of Greenwich should continue to try to do it. We cannot go out and do inspections at this point in time. We're going to be hard pressed just to get the grand list done.
Thank you.
Mr. Raymer, followed by Ms. Tarkenton.
So there are 4 liaisons that work with Ms. Elliott, Ms. Vasiliotis, Ms. Tarkington, Ms. Crumick, and myself. And we had a conversation with the assessor. It was the view of the 5 of us, I believe, that it seems appropriate that the BET would vote, if it, in its discretion, if it wishes to, its support for the recommendation that's being made by the assessor to request the postponement. We thought the postponement should not be something that has the appearance of being just the judgment of just the assessor, but rather should be something the assessor reports to this body. This body should be making that recommendation. And I haven't spoken with our first selectman, but I would think the first selectman would appreciate having that input as well from this board.
Thank you, Ms. Tarkington. And I have Ms. Tarkington followed by Ms. Weisbrod. Then I'll actually have a question for Ms. Rabin. So Ms. Tarkington?
You're muted, Leslie.
Miss Elliott, the other towns that may or may not be considering proceeding with their revow, are they only doing a revow and not doing the physical revow? Because I think that's one of the things that we're doing that also raises an issue with this particular revaluation, is the fact that this is not only our revow year, but it's our every 10-year physical, and our mid and back country, the 2 and 4 acre properties had not yet had their physical revaluation. Can you comment on these other towns that may not be doing it? Are they also doing the physical reval too, or are we unique in that? Do you know?
No, we are not the only town that's doing a physical, but some towns are going to opt for the data mailers. In lieu of actually doing a physical inspection, they're going to just send out a letter asking people to verify the interior information of their dwelling. As you remember, the town of Greenwich tried to do that back in, I think it was a 2009-10 evaluation. And the response that you get from that is very limited. I think we got less than a third. So,
as I remember, you're correct. We only got 30% out of, which was very low. And that means that many of these properties haven't had a physical revaluation since the 2000 era, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Weisbrod?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Elliott, just 2 things real quick. If you could elaborate a little bit as to why Greenwich is somewhat different from the neighboring towns as it relates to COVID, that would be helpful. And the second question is, I recall at one point you thought that and this is speculative, but in light of the relatively stagnant prices of our real estate, there might be benefits, if you think of it in terms of a higher grand list, to do the revaluation now as opposed to postponing it. But in light of some of the news reports about demand picking up for our real estate, that may now be different, that there could be actual benefits in the context of deferring for a year. Am I getting that all twisted, or is there some half truth to what I just said?
there's a lot of truth to what you just said. First of all, your rental market went up, and the amount of houses that were rented out over the last 3 months was month over month was much higher than it was last year, number one. Number two is, part of the reason why I think it's to the town of Greenwich's benefit is that and I think I explained this previously, is we don't really know how COVID is going to affect us. And it is going to affect us more so than other municipalities just because of our proximity to New York State. And we have a lot of commuters, and it is going to affect us more so than, municipalities up in Litchfield County or north of Hartford. Another reason why I think it's beneficial for the town of Greenwich to put this aside for a year is that we have a commercial base that I'm going to have a hard time valuing, because I have only gotten 134 income and expense reports back. The governor granted everybody a deadline of August 15th. So I have $7.1 billion of real estate, commercial real estate, that's going to be quite difficult without current income and expense information, number one. And next year, I will actually be able to look at this income and expense information, and it will actually have COVID in it. In other words, I will know what effect this has on our commercial properties and on our residential properties.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, First Selectman Camilla's not here, but I see Selectman Rabin's here. I'm sort of asking a question to the group. As I understand the process, Lauren, you're recommending that we take advantage of postponing the reval for 1 calendar year. And I think Mr. Raymer's saying that he thinks we, the BET, should endorse that in agreement with you. I probably think we would. But the way I understand this, the process is the office of the first selectman has to actually be the one to request it. So I'll just ask Ms. Rabin, have you had any offline conversations? Have you heard anything against this or?
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of our first selectman, Fred Camilla, we have discussed it. He is aware of the information, the concerns, the issues, and does support a postponement of our reevaluation for a year and is prepared to issue that letter to the Office of Policy Management.
So my question, I want to go back to Mr. Raymer's point, or maybe Ms. Faslotis. Somebody's got to help me.
We don't need to formally recommend, but it's the recommendation of the liaisons that, and I'm going to make a motion to this effect, that the BET accept the recommendation of the assessor requesting that the first selectman submit a letter prepared by the town attorney in consultation with the assessor to OPM extending the revaluation for 1 year to October 1st, 2021. So that's what I'm proposing we do.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'd second that.
Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Discussion on that motion? Everybody's okay with that? Do I need a recorded vote or are we okay on this? Okay, I see no hands going up, so I'm assuming all are in favor of that. Thank you for that motion, by the way. Thank you. Okay.
So, no, Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the assessor's report.
Oh, yeah, we have to get back to that too. I forgot that part. Okay, I have a motion to accept the assessor's report. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Moved by Mr. Harkins, seconded by Mr. Raymer. Discussion? Any opposed? I'm going to consider that 12-0. Thank you. Wow, that was a little bit more of a complicated with the reval than I thought. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much. That moves us in our agenda to item number 4, which is the controller's report.
Good evening, everyone. Let me start out by giving you an update on the COVID-19 reimbursements and where we are as of today, June 15th. As you all know, mentioned previously, the finance department has set up specific accounts to track all COVID-19 expenses and revenue losses. And I'll start with the general fund. As of today, we've incurred $419,533 of general fund expenses that are directly connected to the COVID-19 pandemic. Of that 100,000 was the donation to United Way. We've coded, if you recall that a couple months ago where we had the emergency fund appropriation, we're putting that up for reimbursement. We don't know at this point if we'll get it. If we get it, it's good, but that's part of the 419. So the actual expenses are about 319,000. Revenues to date are 34,324, and they're all directly related to the health department who submitted the expenses, and you're all familiar with that. We accepted about $17,000 previously. So Caroline will be coming again for another about 17,000. What we do is in this area of recording expenses, we have to track the revenues to make sure that we're not double dipping submitting the invoices twice for various expenses. The way it works is we have FEMA reimbursements, we have coronavirus relief fund reimbursements, which are pass-throughs from the federal government to the state. And there's various other reimbursements like the CDBG program that you saw, there was over 400,000. The process, all reimbursements have to start with the FEMA reimbursements, which are 75% of the eligible cost. And in the controller's report, you can see there's a little section where the risk manager is taking the lead on that. And in her role, working with Prima, the risk management agency, she's very close to FEMA personnel. So we're tracking the finance department, the expenses that we're going to pass on to Megan, and she's going to submit them to FEMA. The 25% that's not covered by FEMA is backed up by the Corona Relief Fund, which the finance department is tracking. So between the two, we should have 100% reimbursement of eligible costs. Eligible is key because they're all subject to audit, and that goes back to Megan's role of working with the departments to make sure that the expenses that we're putting into these special codes are directly related to COVID-19. I'll move on to the other funds. We have a very small amount submitted for the parking services and the sewer maintenance, basically PP&E, the personal property equipment, protective equipment, I mean. And in the school lunch program, there's $21,995 submitted for transportation of Greenwich, Association of Greenwich cost. Finally, and I'll circle back and you could ask any questions related to any of these. Finally, a lot of this was covered by Larry Simon, but I'll give you more specific revenue and expense numbers. To date, in the Nathaniel Witherall, we've gotten $980,036 for Medicare. We've already got it. We've gotten $183,000 of Medicaid. So we've gotten a little bit more than the million that Larry's referring to. It's about almost $1,163,000. Larry was very good, and he put together expenses. This was about 2 months ago that go through June 30th. So we're going to submit to FEMA reimbursements on the Nathaniel Witherall expense side for $794,000. FEMA reimbursements are quarterly. And I can't submit reimbursements to the state through the relief fund, coronavirus relief fund, until we've submitted first to FEMA. All of the revenues, all of the expenses are good through December 31st. So this is ongoing. Everything we're talking about now is as of June 30th. So the FEMA will be quarterly, it will be June 30th, and then the next 2 quarters through December 31st. And hopefully the pandemic will be behind us, and then we can start to close out all of these final expenses. So let me stop there before I open it up to the controller's report. Are there any questions relative to the COVID-19 reimbursement process?
So I don't see hands, but I have a question. I know for a fact before we closed, there were days that town hall was still open and the schools were still open. Then they closed for a couple of days, and they finally closed, and they were going to great lengths to buy supplies and clean and weekend fumigations and all of that stuff. We have all of that accounted for already. We're sure in other words, every department, civic centers, right on through other facilities, we're sure for this current fiscal year we've got everything wrestled into an application.
Hopefully so. All the departments in the schools, the libraries, everybody has been contacted. They've been notified to code specifically to these codes. That's when the conversation came up earlier about the human services, the 30-something thousand. We wanted to make sure that this is it in these buckets so that we're making sure that they're submitted for expenses. I can't give you 100% assurance that every department is 100% compliant, that they're putting every one of the PP&E or any cleaning supplies, et cetera, anything that's related to it, to these expenses. But it looks like everybody is complying.
And then my follow-up question is, you had sent us an email. It has to be a week and a half or maybe even a little longer with the application, the next application that was due to be filed and had a lot of documentation with it for July 1.
That would the $1,082,000. That was the state of Connecticut requested every town to submit projections. They wanted actuals up to a certain date, and I think it was it had to be submitted before May 1st, and then they want to project it through June 30th. Subsequent to that, they sent us directions on how to apply for it, but they were crystal clear. You cannot submit reimbursements for that relief fund until you've tried FEMA first, and you tried for the 75%.
Okay.
So that's the process. And that the document you're referring to had $1,082,000, but the bulk of that was $794,000. So with the projections, we came very close to what we submitted between actuals and projection. But again, I'll repeat, this is ongoing. The daily cleaning process. It's if the schools open up in September, there's going to be a lot more cleaning and cleaning related expenses because you're going to have the kids and the teachers and the parents in there. Right now, the schools are closed. So there's relatively, there was an upfront cost. I think they've submitted about $99,000 for reimbursements, but they've been closed for a couple months. So it's an ongoing process.
So in the end, there's always the possibility that something doesn't get filed and there's not reimbursed, and we could have exposure for those expenses for COVID related stuff. It could happen, but it's okay. It's we as long as we're forcing every day to try to have that full accountability, I think that's the number one pressure point we should be pushing on.
Okay.
Ms. Erickson, followed by Ms. Cruiser.
Yes, Pete, if you could just clarify of that 319,533, excluding the United Way contribution, does that include revenue loss, for instance, that Parks and Rec incurred having to cancel spring programs and having to refund monies? Is that included in that number?
No, that the 319 is expenses only.
So are we accounting for revenue loss as well in a separate account?
In the report that Michael just referenced, I also submitted $1 million for revenue loss for the various Parks and Rec programs. We are also tracking them. One of the issues is, for example, the beach cards. This came up last Monday. Their budget for beach cards are about $1,075,000. We're only in 30-something%. We are only at say about 41% when I looked this morning. So for this fiscal year, even though the season straddles 2 fiscal years, I'll be able to quantify, for example, the revenue loss for beach cards after June 30th is closed out. So let's say that they collect only 50%. Let's say they collect $500,000. Then I can quantify that $575,000 was a revenue loss. I could do the same thing for Camp Carefree, et cetera, all the programs. But to answer your question, the 319 is strictly expenses, and we're also tracking the revenue losses, but they're not clear. I don't have clear direction from either FEMA or the state about whether or not how we're going to get reimbursed for revenue losses.
Ms. Cruiser, followed by Ms. Moriarty.
Thank you. Pete, so kind of a follow-on, and I know you mentioned a little bit of the process standpoint at the HR committee. You mentioned that FEMA, you submit quarterly. Do you have any sense as to how quickly those reimbursements come? And are we actually going to be waiting for the sort of official cash in before we go out to that Corona Relief Fund, or just notice that we will anticipate those funds? And I guess my second question is, and this is something you mentioned at HR committee, how do you anticipate when we do get that reimbursement, how will those then, I know there's the 3 accounts that are tracking this, how will they then go back into the different departments, or is all that, coming back into a separate fund for reimbursement from these different programs?
I actually had a conversation. There's a whole bunch of no's to all your answers, Miriam. I actually had a conversation this morning with Megan. FEMA's overwhelmed. I'm going to go back to the December of I think it was 8, or it's 12 years. We're still waiting on almost $1.5 million for the final closeouts on Island Beach from FEMA. We were almost across the finish line about 6 months ago, and we were submitting final documentation, and then it got put on the back burner. We're still waiting for 12 years for that $1.5 million from FEMA. The conversation this morning I had with Megan Zaneski, FEMA's overwhelmed. She has no idea when the reimbursements will come and no confidence in when they're going to come. It's just that, and I understand, we're not talking about a hurricane in, say, the southeast part of the United States. We're talking about 50 states all submitting FEMA claims. They are so overwhelmed that I have no confidence in the money coming within the next 3 or 6 months. Unless they come up with a policy where they, going back to the Board of Education, this is an insurance policy where they gave you money up front, as far as the reimbursement process. But between Megan and myself, and she's very close to the FEMA rep, the top FEMA rep in Connecticut, we don't know where we are in the FEMA process as far as when we'll get the money.
Ms. Moriarty, followed by Mr. Weisbrod and Ms. Hess.
My question is, the FEMA program is reimbursing us 75% of our expenses. Are the other 25% eligible for the coronavirus relief fund, or is the town expected to shoulder those expenses?
It's 75% is FEMA. The relief fund is 25%. They're both eligible.
Okay, so it's just what is
they're
not
eligible.
eligible.
Yeah. Now, what also is not part of that, Caroline Baisley came before you, and there's also a little, there's a little piece for the health departments in the town. They have a different process. The $34,000 that I mentioned earlier is being reimbursed through not FEMA and not the relief fund. And that's why we track the revenues and expenses together, so that I can't double dip and submit that $34,000 expenses twice. And then there is some 400 and something thousand that came from CDBG. There is Larry and others at Nathaniel Witherall are getting money from Medicare and Medicaid that's so totally separate from all of this. That's on the revenue side. We're getting stimulus money through people on FMLA, where we don't have to pay the employer FICA portion of the taxes, and through the quarterly finances tax filings we file with the IRS for the FIT and the FICA, the federal income tax, we get credits. We're also getting money outside of all of these programs, 50% reimbursements for unemployment, I believe starting in March, on the unemployment spikes that we'll be experiencing from March going forward. So it's coming from all different areas.
Wow. Mr. Weisbrod, followed by Ms. Hess.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering whether you might delegate one of the committees, audit or budget, to put this on their agenda for, given all the questions that we're asking and all the interest there seems to be, it might be a useful topic for one of the committees to, cover, and then for it to be summarized in Pete's report or at the full BET.
I consider that a great suggestion. I would ask the little liberty of not committing to that decision right now, but I'm sitting here saying to myself, okay, so we've got timeline on cash flow. We've got cash flow. What's reimbursable, making sure we file everything, budget guidelines to think about. And I'm like, oh boy, this is just really just a simple day in town Greenwich government. And I'm sitting here looking at Peter Minarski saying, wow, how's he keeping track of this? We will do something. We're going to have to do something with somehow separate in the BET to just deal with, I don't even know what to label this, the COVID expenses and getting reimbursements. I just don't quite have an answer for it, but I think your suggestion is well taken. And please, everybody, send me an email on your thoughts on that, please, right away. Before Ms. Tarkington, Peter Minarski had his hand back up for a second. Ms. Hess,
I think that David, very good point. And if through you to Mr. Drake, we could just make this a monthly update at the audit committee. We do the cybersecurity. This is normally fits into the audit committee because Megan and I both attend that meeting normally.
I'd certainly be open to that if it's workable in your opinion, Pete. I know you're the hands on the wheel here.
Yeah, it's
we want to help you succeed.
Yeah, it's actually applicable to both the budget committee and the audit committee, but I don't want to duplicate I mean, we can give the same report twice.
No, I hear that. Ms. Hess was next.
Oh, yeah, I'm just curious. We've incurred some extra costs related to getting all of the virtual meetings up and running. Is that an expense that we get to submit as part of this? It's COVID related.
Actually, I have the report in front of me, and I'm gonna. I haven't drilled down. IT department submitted expense reimbursements for $22,209. I'm going to assume that's the assistance we've got from the outside people. It might be Craig. I'm not sure. It might be Jenny. And then there's $3,746. I think there was some Zoom licenses that had to be procured up until next February. So we've got that expense covered through IT.
Okay. Thank you.
There's another example of the governor's mandate. One of those Saturday night notices that we got mandated the first selectman put things in process to enable this, whatever we call these virtual meetings. So I would think it is an extra cost, and I would think it was mandated. I think it should have reimbursement, but we're going to definitely have to do something. My emails are open. Please send me thoughts. We'll put this together. It sounds like if Peter's looking towards the audit committee, that's probably the way we should go. But I think we all think about this and come up with some ideas. Further discussion, Ms. Tarkington?
Yeah, I'm just going to say we did have this report earlier in the month as part of the budget committee discussion under the economic conditions. But I do think once later on. It could become an audit issue, and it makes sense to be audited too. But it also is really a revenue item in terms of looking at our whole thing. So it's just make that one comment.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up. While we're on COVID expenses, I want to get back to the controls report, but I think Peter had asked to deal with COVID first. I see no other hands, so back to the controls report.
I'll just take any questions that anybody has on the controller's report.
I am seeing none. I think you got us pretty good tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Can I get a motion to accept the controller's report?
I'll move to accept the controller's report.
Seconded by Mr. Raymer. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, everyone. Treasurer's report. Let me just share that real quick. My finger's tired of scrolling. Can I get a motion to accept the treasurer's report? This is, I want to pull this up.
So move.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Discussion. I'd really like to get it depicted here. I'm trying to do stuff because the public doesn't really get to ever see our documents as we're working them. And I'm certainly going to wear out the mouse doing this.
Mr. Mason?
Yes, Ms. Crumick.
I don't know when you want to take an abstention to the.
When Thank you, Mr. Crowe. When I call for the vote, I just want to share this. I think some of the feedback I've gotten from the public is obviously people wanting to, they see us on Zoom and we get usually really pretty heavy attendance, but they don't know exactly what we're talking about. So this is the Town of Greenwich Monthly Treasury Report for May. As you can see, this is a document we get from the Treasurer's Office each month. And we're responsible for this, so I just think it would be good to share it. Okay, further discussion? Okay, Mr. Drake, can you do a record vote? I think I have one abstention for sure on the Treasurer's Report for the month of May.
Sure. Ms. Cruiser,
Yes.
Ms. Hess,
Yes.
Ms. Crumick,
Abstention.
Ms. Moriarty,
Yes.
Ms. Tarkenton,
Yes.
Mr. Mason.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Ms. Vasiliotis,
Yes.
Mr. Raymer,
Yes.
Mr. Deuce,
Yes.
Mr. Weisbrod,
Yes.
Ms. Erickson.
Yes.
That was 11-0-1.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's move back to our agenda, and that brings us to, just see, I believe our standing committee reports. And I do not have anything checked off there. Anybody feel free to interrupt if there's something I'm missing. I didn't have any, which brings us to our liaison reports. Anything? Do I have anything there? I see nothing. Our special project team. Any one of us can give a, Mr. Raymer, why don't you take a whack at the fire study? Give us a quick update where we are.
So we have received a draft report. Actually, earlier in the fall, we received an inventory of the fire suppression assets. But more importantly, a week and a half ago, we received a draft report, and the committee will be meeting on Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning to go through the draft and propose changes, questions, issues. I don't want to speak in detail about the draft. It's only a draft. But I will take the liberty of saying that I personally was impressed with the detail and expertise that I think they brought to bear. They also brought forward a number of what I viewed as being illuminating observations. And I thought I was somebody who was fairly familiar with the fire process in Greenwich. I found it very educational. I look forward to being able to disseminate the final report to the public. I think it will serve the public well to have that report. Is that kind of the report you wanted, Mr. Chairman?
Anything? Yeah, I was going to call Ms. Vasiliotis as well, and then.
Okay.
Ms. Vasiliotis, do you have anything you want to?
Yeah, I mean, as Mr. Raymer said, it is a draft report. I think it does need some work. There were some findings that I think, as Mr. Raymer said, were illuminating. But I do think that this is a very rough report that will need some substantial changes as far as formatting and conclusions, et cetera. So we have our work cut out for us.
No, and thank you both very much. I will say, this is being led right now by the town administrator, Ben Brannion, and I think Selectman Rabin is still with us, and he's done a fantastic job. He's called us together for the next meeting. If the committee still chooses, I still would like to see at some point when we're more to a formal document, a public something on this report. But the four of us on the committee could host that, obviously for the BET, but more of in a public forum, an information report on this once we get to that. So I'm hoping the support will continue, at least by the committee, for that.
Mr. Mason, I would also add that in addition to Ben Brannion, Pete Minarski is also taking the lead on this. Too,
yes,
so.
I'm sorry, my mistake. Peter. No, I can't do that to you. No, thank you. No, it is very important, and it's been a lot of work. It's one of the few things that did not get knocked off its original timeline. I think we are actually on sort of the original timeline that we thought about. New Lepsco, I have nothing.
Can I comment just so the public, if the public is listening, the other two members of the BET that are serving on that committee are the chairman, Mr. Mason, and also David Weisbrot.
Yes, yes. Let's see. Old business. I have nothing under old business. Can I get out?
I'd like to make a motion to add an item to the agenda under old business. And the motion is to extend our ability to have Zoom meetings to September 30th for all meetings of the BET. The reason being, well, I'll move it and hopefully get a second, and then I'll explain it.
I'll second that.
By Ms. Hess, moved by Ms. Feslotus, second by Ms. Feslotus. Discussion?
Yes, when we originally voted, we voted to, I believe, the end of June to have the ability to do Zoom meetings. My understanding is that although town hall is open, conference rooms will not be available, most likely through the end of September. So I am proposing that we just extend our ability to have Zoom meetings instead of regular meetings in town hall through September 30th. For all of our meetings, including committee meetings of the BET. And obviously, if circumstances change, we can always adjust that.
So if I'm understanding Robert's rules, we need a 2/3 vote to suspend the rules to add an item to our agenda. So that's the first motion we would have to dispose of, and then we can have a discussion if you'd like on the merits of the continuing with Zoom. Is there anyone against adding this item to the agenda? So I'm going to consider we've got the 2/3 vote on that and call that 12-0. Discussion on the merits till going till September 30th. Any discussion on that? Mr. Weisbrot has his hand up, I think.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering whether we should consider extending it further. I mean, God willing, we are able to convene in person, in the fourth quarter, but is there merit in giving ourselves the flexibility to use Zoom if necessary? For example, the Metropolitan Opera, the Philharmonic, these public assemblies are canceling their season for the rest of the year. I'm not saying we're the same as them, but just to give us the extra flexibility. Of course, if things get better, we don't have to adhere to December, but just a consideration.
Point well taken. Mr. Raymer, you have your hand up.
Yeah, the only question I had is that we're using a Zoom format and using that to fulfill our obligations of public access under FOIA pursuant to executive order from the governor. And I don't know if we're proposing dates which go beyond the authority which is granted to us by the governor. I don't remember what the governor's orders said, but I don't think I'd like to pass a motion that goes beyond whatever.
I can answer that. I did research his original order. There is no end date. It basically extends the requirement for a Zoom meeting. So absent another executive order to the contrary, basically it remains into effect until it's rescinded by the governor. But right now it has no specific end date.
Thank you. And by the way, I think Ms. Feslotus, Ms. Moriarty, and I we were in an email today talking about that, and we actually had the executive order. I picked the end of September for nothing other than I have no idea if Zoom is going to be old technology by then. If there's going to be something else we're going to, I don't know any of that. We've been kind of doing it in a quarterly basis. Me personally, I think even if meetings in town opened up and went to normal, we would still be doing Zoom in the future of some type because of the recording and other issues. And from what we've seen from a public perspective, I mean, the RTM has broken every attendance record in their history with participation. So
we didn't do badly either.
No, we haven't. No. But I mean, it's, I'd like to stick with September, and see what the product is. But Mr. Drake, followed by Mr. Deuce.
I think Miss David's idea is a good one. I'd vote for through December.
Mr. Deuce?
Yes, in fact, I go an extra step. I vote for an indefinite period to continue Zoom. I think it's a great tool, and as you just observed, Mr. Chair, that the public participation here has been phenomenal. It's a great way to get more people involved. I do ask one question: is we do this pursuant to a license from Zoom that I think allows us to have these numbers participating, and if we're going to go down this route, we probably should make sure we have the latitude with a license to go beyond what was initially anticipated.
So we have a motion till September 30th. We have to dispense of that before we would take on a motion for going till December and then a motion for indefinite. Why don't we go to September and see where we get to first? It's easier. I think they're all good points. There's no doubt. And not only that, but I'm looking at Craig Jones's name and I don't want him to go home and pack his bags and leave town. But okay, so let's stick with the original motion first. All those in favor of the September 30th extension?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That motion
Unanimous.
passes. Thank you. Thank you for adding the item. New business. Other post-employment benefit trust.
Yes. Mike, were we gonna vote on David's longer period? What do we think, friends?
Well, we passed one motion. Would you like to make a motion to extend it to?
If David makes it, I'll second it and vote for it.
Actually, I would make the motion that Andy Deuce was suggesting. It may give us the most flexibility. So I would move that we extend the, use of Zoom indefinitely.
I don't know whether I would agree with that, only because I think that, we need to be able, I don't like open-ended agreements, quite frankly.
Then I change that based on Karen's input.
I could support to December.
I then alter my motion to December 31st.
Second.
I'll second.
We have a motion. It's been seconded. Discussion. So the motion is to supersede the last motion and go until December 31st. The ability to go December 31st. Okay, anybody against it? That motion has, Ms. Erickson's hands up.
Well, I just have a question. If we have guidance from town hall that town meeting rooms are open and other boards and commissions are meeting, does this preclude us from having an in-person meeting and allowing participants via Zoom and to vote that way? Or, I mean,
I would argue no. It gives us the flexibility to have a Zoom meeting, but certainly if there's, the ability to do an in-person meeting, the committee chair can certainly do that.
So that's my question. The intent is to preserve flexibility. I support this motion, but there's a lot that happens between now and September and between now and September. So
I agree, but it's up to the committee chair to determine whether or not, they have an in-person or a Zoom meeting. I don't see that takes away the authority of the chair to decide that.
I mean, I just think, remember, we're elected officials, we're accountable, and we need to be careful that we're not sending the signal that maybe.
I don't think that it is, Laura. I think that, again, if town hall is available, I certainly as committee chair would hold a meeting in town hall. But again, certain members may not feel comfortable. We get into the old, people over 60 or 65 are more vulnerable to corona. It's not going to go away anytime soon. I would just offer that it would give us the flexibility should members decide that they wanted to participate virtually.
Okay, so Ms. Moriarty's hand is up.
I just wanted to add, I wouldn't want, I think as a board, we'd want to do sort of all the same thing. Ms. Vasiliotis just raised the issue that committee chairs might do one thing and the full board does another. I don't want to have that uncertainty. I do think I'd want to preserve the ability for the public to attend our meetings. I think we have seen the increased involvement, and that's a good thing for town government. So I don't think we've heard how you would have a hybrid in-person and a Zoom access meeting. I think.
I'm just using it as an example. I don't,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not,
I'm supportive of figuring this out. I think we are sending a signal by voting this to say through December, kind of people not close enough to the discussions that will hear that our intent is to do this through December.
you know, again, we also have, you know, guidelines in place for a certain amount of people in a room. You know, those things may change as well. So I think we need the flexibility to be able to, you know, to use Zoom to the end of the year. And if that changes, we certainly can have another discussion.
Yeah.
If I could,
All the concerns. I mean, this is going to come down to, you know, what are we allowed to do in town hall? It's going to be lots of conversations. That's why I say, I think going forward, there's going to be technology change. And I think
Mike, there's something.
not here. I think that the technology is going to change. We'll see what's available to us, but we can always make a motion to rescind or to change this. So, okay. So all those in favor of December 31st as the date?
Aye.
aye.
Those opposed? I don't see any opposed. Somebody's whistling though.
Sounds like coffee.
Laura Erickson's going to abstain.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
that vote therefore became 11-01.
Yeah. Okay, back onto new business. We have our other post-employment benefit members who are up for appointment or reappointment. I would call on Mr. Deuce if you
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The OPEB Trust Board is responsible for the management of an investment portfolio to cover future OPEB expenses of the town. And the board's actions are subject to the prior approval of the BET Investment Advisory Committee. The board itself consists of 3 members who are nominated by the public and are appointed by the BET. The board has staggered terms with for 3-year terms. Now today, or rather last Thursday, the IAC met and approved making recommendations to the BET for 2 reappointments. Both recommendations were approved 4-0. The first recommendation is, quote, and I'll read this to you, resolved that the Board of Estimate and Taxation reappoints William Ferdinand to a term on the OPEB Trust Board expiring June 30, 2023. Further resolved that the Board of Estimate and Taxation reappoints Rob Stricker of the OPEB Board as chairman of the said board for another term ending June 30th, 2021. Again, regular members get 3 years. The chairman is only a 1-year term. And so you'll see that every year at this time.
So if I may, these nominations are coming on behalf of the Investment Advisory Committee?
Yes.
Okay, that therefore not needing a second discussion. I don't have my screen up because I want the public to be able to see the resolution. So discussion on this, just kind of.
Can I just, for the public, the term OPEB refers to other post-employment benefits, just so that everybody's clear as to what it means.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if I could add, we are very fortunate to have 3 members serving on the OPEB Board Trust who are individually very good, and together they're very complementary. Rob Stricker has an excellent fixed income background. Bill Ferdinand has a background of equity investing, including a long stint as managing pension investments. We're both very fortunate to have both these gentlemen, and both are very eager to continue serving on the OPEB Trust Board. And the third member I should mention is Joe Pellegrino, who many of you know. He also has a very strong equity background, and together they work very well, and we're very lucky to have them working on our behalf. I'll also add that the fund has done well this year. It's up several %, and the total value of the investments is over $32 million.
Okay, further discussion? Okay. Do I need a record vote on these 2 positions? If not, can I assume all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll put that as 12-0 on that. And thank you, Mr. Deuce. Continuing on, that brings us to Chair's report. I would say that I think we learned a little bit in the Controller's report about the complexity of things going on. Let me just share with you a week of interesting things that I think we all need to really roll up our sleeves on. So work is behind in town. We know that. So if you have a facility that has a swimming pool, you need an annual inspection, a commercial pool. Those have been lagging. The department's working very hard to get caught up. But those of us know that swimming pools, the town's got quite a little bit of history in our past. And to me, it's a liability. All the facilities in the town get their annual inspections and licensing. That applies to elevators. That applies to so many different facets across the town that are day-to-day business. I call it day-to-day business. Fire inspections, fire marshal inspections. And although we don't know what's lagging, we know and if anything obviously is, we probably have a pretty good idea why. But I think we as a town need to really start thinking about sort of how do we catch up? We've had 90 days of less than, normal operations going on. We've had certain departments deviating from their normal routine, doing things. I saw the Parks and Rec department on the avenue moving barriers and setting up the outside thing. That's not their norm, but they're doing it. So there are distractions and there are just issues. And I think we as a BET ought to really make sure that we're, on top of everything. I think we're all dug in pretty good on this COVID stuff, which is fantastic. It's going to need all of our work. I think as we go forward, we're going to be busy. This is not going to be a regular year by any stretch of the imagination with all the things going on. So it's going to take a lot of work. I cannot thank Roland and Peter enough. I mean, I think I tried to do it in front of the town at the town meeting and to all of you, but it's been amazing. And all these years, I never talked to. One time I talked to Peter on a weekend in 15 years. And Roland, I never ever talked to, and I want to just thank them for their extra efforts and as we roll up and close out this year and start the next one. So I think that's just important. We keep your ears open for anything that's, anything that we can do to help, especially if that's possible. So that's how I think we should be looking at going forward. So that's all I really have, which brings us to item 12, which is approval of BET meeting minutes. Mr. Drake.
We have 6 sets of minutes in your package: April 20th, April 21st, April 23rd, April 27th, May 5th, and May 18th. Some of them have had a lot of work over the weeks. I had excellent comments from lots of you. I tried to incorporate essentially all of them, and I would offer to move them for you as a group.
Okay. Do I have a second on the minutes? Seconded by?
I second it.
Ms. Krummick. Thank you. Discussion on any of the minutes? I see nothing. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Erickson. I have a hand up.
Whoops, my battery's about to die on my iPad. But the only thing I would say is that Elaine sent around some small revisions to the public hearing minutes, which I believe was April 21st, if I'm not mistaken. So they're not exactly as they appear in the packet, but the changes were to correct a misspelling and to add a link to the public comments. That's it.
Thank you. Any other discussions? Do I have anybody opposed? All those in favor? I see no negative. Oh, Ms. Erickson, put your hand back up, or did I do that?
No, it's
checking. Okay,
I
all
gotta
those,
find the charger. If I leave, it's not you. I just I'm having an issue here.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those have so moved. That concludes, that brings us to item 13, adjournment. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.